Just want to remind you guys, this episode is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup.
What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Guys, we saw that the Indianapolis Colts have pretty much now fully filled their defensive coaching staff. The newest hire in the secondaries coach, Chris Hewitt. Cody had his initial reaction to the hire on the Reacts channel, so make sure to go do that and go look at that if you guys haven't already. Sitting behind this for a minute, and it's unfortunate, Cody, because, you know, this whole Luka Doncic trade is now got everyone talking about that rather than about the Colts move that we have. So now all the Colts fans and Colts media people that would normally be covering and otherwise that is covering something else. But we move into kind of what everybody had been saying. And I kind of want to break this down, guys, and kind of talk about overall the span of some of the new hires and what the Colts have done from who they've hired, how it's going to impact the defense in a bunch of different ways. Because I don't think a lot of people realize just how different things might look this year. I know everyone's saying they're just going to run it back with the same unit. I think that it might be a lot of surprises. I think a lot of people are not quite ready for. But before we hop into the whole staff in general, I never really got a chance to talk about Chris Hewitt. Obviously, a guy that has had a lot of respect, and especially, amongst the Ravens organization. I even saw a lot of Colts fans after we brought Hewitt in. A lot of people were saying he was in the running for a potential head coach hiring a few years ago. And some Colts fans were even saying they wanted him to even be considered for the head coaching job here back in 2023. So, there's definitely prowess, and some Colts fans definitely feel that way. And obviously, a lot of people were surprised that he was even cut. I remember Landon Oliver tweeting it, Cody. He said, he didn't even realize that he was cut because, he's such a well-respected guy, especially amongst the Ravens organization. They were surprised that they even let him go. And then, he was fired on a Monday, and then we bring him in on a Saturday. So he was on the market for literally less than a week. And, he's now already got a new position. And another thing, which is crazy too, is a lot of people were saying, how in the world did the Colts convince him to take the exact same position of coaching just with a different team, and even a team that doesn't quite have the same level of talent as that Ravens secondary does? Definitely an interesting little tidbit there because, you're right. With the way everybody's talking about him, I'm surprised his name wasn't in the running more for DC positions or all this other stuff. But I think since everything happened so quickly, Cody, I think that's why he was just so quick to take another job at the same spot, because maybe he was caught off guard by the fact that he got fired, and maybe Lou pitched a really good pitch to him. I have no idea. But what was your reaction to hearing that Hewitt's coming to Indy?
Man, I said it yesterday in my reaction. I think you hinted at the beginning. If you don't think the Colts are going to make a major emphasis on the defensive backfield, and it's very clear that they were not pleased at all with how that unit performed a year ago, I think this should tell you all that you're looking for, right? Lou Anarumo and pretty much every other defensive coordinator the Colts brought in for interviews were pretty much all outside, I think, Wink Martindale, were all DB focused. They all had previous backgrounds in, coaching defensive backs. And, talk about Chris Hewitt, who, was very quick, like you said. Some people didn't even realize that he was, out of Baltimore because he'd been there his whole entire coaching tenure for the last 13 years. So, Yeah, I mean, overall, Derek, if you look at like some of the best DB coaches out there, I think Chris Hewitt right there is at the top for a lot of people, right? This is a guy that's, had multiple years where, with the Baltimore Ravens, where they've had some very elite secondaries. I mean, so many different guys that, he's helped coach and turn into Pro Bowlers. I mean, so many different players
Mhm.
that you could point to, that with the Ravens defense that has turned this Ravens defense in the last decade plus that he's been there into one of the more respected units in the NFL year in and year out. So, and again, talking about, the focus on DBs, but also, Derek, look at now the coaching staff on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, it's all of these guys who have had a ton of experience and are well regarded in a lot of different ways. And two guys now that have very much in their past been considered for head coaching positions, right? Lou was the same way a couple of years ago. So there's a lot of well-respected guys here, the Colts are bringing in. And Chris Hewitt, I think, is the guy that definitely is the most accomplished as of recently. And I do think, Derek, there has to be and there will be a major emphasis when it comes to personnel in the next couple weeks and months, whenever free agency hits and all that stuff. It's very obvious to me that the Colts saw that their secondary was nowhere near the standard it needed to be. I mean, we saw it, Derek, this last year, how many times opposing quarterbacks just ate the secondary apart, right? And just completely diced them, And so I really do believe that this is a concerted effort, coaching staff wide, and also potentially coming up personnel wide to do almost like a complete overhaul on the secondary. That's what it seems like, because you saw how much the Colts emphasized and have invested in, their defensive line, for example. But when it comes to DB and when it comes to the secondary, I mean, not a ton of investment, really. I mean, when you look at your top three corners, Derek, right now. I don't even know how you want to throw it out, but two of your top three guys are either seventh round or undrafted guys, right? That's kind of how it is. Now, Kenny Moore obviously is that exception type of guy. Samuel Womack was a waiver claim, and really the only guy a substantial amount of draft capital is a guy that can't stay healthy in Juju Brents in your corner room. And then, you have a couple mid-round picks in your safety room. So if that tells you right there, Derek, the Colts very much need to add an infusion of talent in this secondary. And obviously, you can bring in as many, well-respected guys as you can, but at the end of the day, you need to have players that can rise to the occasion and can take this unit to the next level. But from what Ballard has said about this secondary and the need to improve, from what they've done so far on this defensive side of the ball, it definitely seems like they're putting their money where their mouth is right now. But again, in a couple weeks, a couple months, we'll see if it continues that way. But so far, I would say, from Ballard's words to his actions so far, it definitely seems like that has been the case and definitely been the emphasis.
Yeah, so you look at it, they've added a new linebacker coach and James Betcher, guy that's been in the league now for 12 years, has had defensive coordinator experience in the past. And now you got Chris Hewitt, who is, also just even last year was getting defensive coordinator offers or at least interviews. So there was interest in that from some people. And then obviously you have Lou now, who is, going to be a guy that's going to be a multi-scheme, going to figure things out. So you're right. You now have a plethora of very experienced guys, and not only experienced guys, Cody, but like guys that acknowledge and are willing to coach, like are actually willing to be coaches. And no disrespect to, again, the guys that we've had before this. In retrospect, the guys that you had before this, they were former players. And again, former players can a lot of times go on to be very prominent coaches in the NFL and sometimes even in certain spots and position coaches. But that was where we were at there with that, though. Cato June and Mike Mitchell, and I don't even think it was Mike Mitchell before that, but, again, you've had former guys that, didn't really have a lot of coaching experience before this. You just brought in guys that know the building. They know a lot of the players and know how the game goes right now, at least as of right now. But, how instructive and how strict were those guys with getting the most out of their players? right? And we have video of Chris Hewitt, like literally screaming and yelling at Ravens secondary guys for not playing through the tackle, and even in practices, like not going hard enough. Like, we have video of him being a hard ass, and that's kind of what it feel like this team needs. And we heard Betcher as well talk about how, like, he's been around enough to know the teams that say that they're almost there are usually not there. And so he gets it. He's smart enough to understand it. And Lou, I mean, he's even come out, he's talked about it too. He said, like, these guys are going to want to work hard. Like, I'm not going to be anybody's friend. I'm going to, be their coach, and I'm going to be hard on them. And cuz the players that want to be here want to be coached. So you're noticing a trend here with this group of defensive coaches that we're getting, which, I mean, I think it looks at it in a couple different ways, Cody. Like you said, outside of Kenny Moore, every single corner that you have in the room is 25 or lower. So they're all young guys. And so if there is anyone that can get more out of those players, I feel like Chris Hewitt is one of the few guys that really can get the most out of them from that perspective. But I think just looking at all of these coaches all together, it really dictates a potential shift in how the Colts want to approach this offseason. Like you said, Ballard already said it was a mistake to just run it back with everyone and just expect everyone, because last year you just hoped that your young guys were going to take that leap. But in retrospect, how were they going to take the leap? Were they getting coached different? Were you just hoping the fact that one more year in the NFL might make them better? Like, sometimes that works, but that doesn't work for every young guy, though. So you have to have the right coaching. You have to have the right people involved. And I think that also means, since Chris Hewitt is also very experienced in, working with some older safeties and corners in the rooms, and, Lou is a guy that needs more talent around it. And we've seen how bad this defense is. I mean, Cody, this is a very experienced and very thought after defensive coordinator room. I feel like the Colts have to go overloading this offseason, because you cannot just run back these same young, inexperienced guys. And even with the coaching of Chris Hewitt, cannot expect these guys to just automatically become a really good defense unless you bring in the veterans that know what they're doing. As we said, guys, today's episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. Now, what is PrizePicks? PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Instead of battling against thousands of other players across platforms, you're basically picking 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're choosing more or less on those stat projections to be able to watch those winnings roll in. It's very easy. Do you guys want to play along at some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and UFC fighter Sugar Sean O'Malley? Well, if you guys sign up today, you can find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view the entries of some of the biggest names on the platform and be a part of that as well. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 just like that with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Like a lot of other things, guys, they also offer injury insurance, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So if someone exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player projection won't count against you, and the rest of your entry stays live. So it's great bounce back for that one. What I love about the app as well, guys, is it's not just sports like NBA, NHL, football, and tennis, and baseball, and all these other things, but there's also a lot of others that go into it as well. If you like to place entries on video game situations like Call of Duty, CS2, Apex, if that's something that appeals to you. There's a wide variety of sports and video games and everything else that you can place entries on. And I love how expansive it is. Even just looking at the NBA, there's entries you can make with turnovers, with points. You can do combo deals, dunks, field goals attempted, all of these different things. So there's just so many different ways to make money off of these entries. Be sure to download the app today and use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a sweet spot here that the Colts must strike when it comes to, developing guys still in your building. I think there's really two young guys that you can honestly point to and say long term they could be pieces, and that is Jalen Jones and Nick Cross.
Yep.
You still have Kenny Moore in the room. He's on that side of 30, so he's still got some good ball ahead of him, but he's not going to be here forever, right? And so you don't know with Julian Blackmon. You don't know with Samuel Womack. Juju Brents, you can't rely on, even if he still is on your roster. So, yeah, I think there is something about developing those guys and being able to help them take their game to the next level. But also, like you said, you need to add some proven talent in this building. You have to. You have to add some fresh blood. You have to add some guys who have been here longer than a couple seasons, that have actually played at a high level, not just adding these, CD level players. You got to add some Bs. You got to add potentially even a couple As. You got to add a few guys in here that are going to seriously add some proven talent and depth into this, secondary in general, because it really is kind of bare right now with the guys you have under contract. It really is. So you got to figure that out. You really need to do that. And, like we said, and Lou also, one thing to point out with the veterans, Lou typically prefers those guys in a lot of ways, right? We've seen him with some of the best secondaries that he's had in his time. He's had Jesse Bates. He's had, throw in whoever else you want to throw in. He's had some of these veteran guys, right, that have come in. And so I think that combination of some of these guys that, Derek, right now, a lot of these guys, they're entering year 3 and 4. So they're not really, they're young, but they're not rookies anymore. They now, the time is now for them to really ascend into being good players, with Nick Cross and Jalen Jones. So it's not like you have all these guys going into year 2. These guys are going into year 3 and 4 now. So it's a big deal, right? So yeah, I do think there is a balance that needs to be struck here with kind of the developing your own young guys, but also bringing in some fresh guys to really elevate the talent of this group to a whole nother notch.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I think it's going to be very interesting. Keep an eye out for what Indy will do. And I think this not only obviously is going to have to get approached in free agency, but I know a lot of people are really hoping that the Indianapolis Colts attack offense in the draft. I'll be completely honest with you, Cody. I think that it might be surprised that the Colts might go defense heavy early. To be completely honest, they might go and get a tight end in one of the few rounds early in the draft, no doubt. But the thing is, though, running backs, there's plenty of them. Wide receivers, there's always plenty of those. Offensive line, you can get quality offensive line depth late in drafts. We've seen Chris Ballard do that a lot. And it's been one of the few things that he's done really well, has found that offensive line depth later in drafts as well. But that defense, the defense is where it's at in this draft. And I think that while the iron's hot, got to get the guys that are out there that are going to make the difference when you go out there. Obviously, we don't know about Latu going forward and all this other stuff, but with just how many different changes defensively you've had to make and how aggressive the coaches are on the defensive side of things, Cody, it just sounds to me like there's going to be some major changes, both from schematics, how they play, and who will be playing come 2025.
And really, when you look at the offense, Derek, really outside of a couple offensive line questions, I mean, honestly, a lot of these guys, that and I would say maybe tight end as well. I mean, other than that, there's not a ton of needs. Whereas defense, I think from pretty much every position, maybe outside of a few on the defensive line, there are major questions just about everywhere, right? So, and we'll probably make a video on this later, but like I do believe, Derek, this offseason for the Colts will be, and honestly has to be, very defensive focused. You really need to add a lot of talent on this defense. I really do believe you do. And give all these new coaches something to work with here because you really haven't when it comes to the defensive backs, especially last year, you didn't do anything at all. And you just, like you said, you focused internally on hoping some of these guys would take jumps. And sometimes it did, like Nick Cross and Jalen Jones, I think had nice year 2s and 3s respectively. But also, Derek, it didn't for some guys. Either guys got hurt or just didn't live up to the potential. Even guys like Julian Blackmon. Again, I know he was hurt, but you expected him to have a similar season to what he had in 2023, and it just didn't happen. So, yeah, there definitely needs to be a big focus here, I think, on the defensive side of the ball. Not to say you don't address offense, because I still think there will be some moves. But I think if you're making me kind of choose which side I foresee the Colts really addressing more than the other, it's probably defense to me. Because to me, there's a lot more questions on the defense than the offense. And yes, the offense has questions. There's certainly questions, starting with the quarterback. But defense definitely needs a major overhaul. And I think if there's one side of the ball, it's probably defense that's going to get more attention this offseason.
Yep, 100%. So you would have thought that based off of the offseason, you thought the offense was going to immediately be the problem. But it sounds like, some changes are coming for that defense. But let us know your thoughts, guys, on Chris Hewitt, this overall defensive approach with the new coaches that they have brought in and how that could impact this defense going forward. Well, let us know your thoughts, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, guys, go Colts.